Will I ever be able to write anything great? Will I ever become a journalist or a writer? I hope so. Oh, I hope so very much, for I can recapture everything when I write. My thoughts, my ideals, and my fantasies.
It's interesting because we would not have thought to do something on Anne Frank because she is so well known and her diary is so widely read. There's so much out there in contemporary culture about Anne Frank, and we really see our job is to do things that no one else is doing, to do things that are unique to the national institution of Holocaust remembrance. But it was our 10th anniversary year. Two of our curators working on one of our 10th anniversary exhibits devoted to hidden children, they were of course thinking about hidden children in general and who's the most famous hidden child? Anne Frank. So they had a very wild idea, seems wild at the time, maybe less so now, whether one could even borrow and show Anne Frank's writings, her diary at the museum. And it turns out that they had this idea, and when I heard about the idea, I thought, well, that's the thing to do for the American people for the 10th anniversary. And so we made contact with our partners in Amsterdam, the Dutch Institute for War Documentation, and they were willing to entertain a discussion. They had never done this before. And then we contacted the Anne Frank Foundation in Basel, that owns the copyright to Anne's works, and they too were a little stunned by the request. Again, it was completely novel, but they were willing to consider it. And it was only after that when we began to look at the material in the bank vault that we realized that there was a bigger story than just bringing parts of the original diary here, that there was this real story about her as a writer that nobody knew. Anne received her first diary on her birthday, right before she went into hiding. This is the diary that people are, I think, familiar with. It's a red plaid, typical diary notebook. She received it in June. She goes into hiding in July, and she becomes a pretty prolific writer right away. Her diary is sporadically, initially, a dialogue between herself and Kitty, an invented friend, but it's sporadic. When she starts revising the diary, when she thinks it's going to be published and she's writing this edited version on these loose sheets of paper, she consistently begins every entry with "Dear Kitty." I think the dialogue was there in her mind from the beginning because it really began out of this source of loneliness. I'm guessing, and again, we're all just speculating at this time, but that she felt that that was a very effective literary tool when she's writing for publication. So I think she is writing initially solely for herself. One of the things I hope comes out of this exhibit is that adults reread this diary. When one reads it as a teenager, one sees it as a peer telling an interesting story that ends very sadly because she dies. I think reading it as an adult, one realizes that in this one child, the combination of her personality, which was quite engaging and I could see being quite annoying at times to an adult, in this one personality that was so curious about the world around her and so precocious, and in many ways so much of a handful, that you took someone like that and you suddenly confined her whole living space very narrowly, forcing her to live with a middle-aged man in these terrible circumstances where her whole world gets shut off. And what happens when you create, it's almost a combustible mix here. And in some ways she's so lonely and has no outlet for expression, and that's why I think writing begins really to relieve loneliness at first. And then she realizes it's really a way to think about herself and her world, and it becomes a form of creativity and expression, and that this ambition then really becomes part of her future and her dreams. And to see that evolution in one child, I thought was just a really fascinating as an adult. When I went and looked at this material in the bank vault and saw this book that she called Stories and Events from the Annex, I had asked them, was this published anymore? Was anybody aware of the material? And there was an English publication of it, and I just started, thumbing through it, and I opened to this essay called Give, and I'm intrigued by the title. And I just start reading it, and it's just an astonishing thing for a child to be thinking about how human relations can be improved. for any child, let alone a child who has at this moment in time been treated so terribly by the world.
Everything starts in small ways. So in this case, you can begin in small ways too. On streetcars, for example, don't just offer your seat to rich mothers. Think of the poor ones too. And say, "Excuse me," when you step on a poor person's toe, just as you say it to a rich one. It takes so little effort, yet it means so much.
We don't know exactly when Anne wrote Give. She recorded it into her notebook in the end of March of 1944. At this point, she would have been about 14 and a half. She would have been in hiding for almost 2 years. This was before the invasion of Normandy. They were waiting for the invasion. They were desperate for it. That was going to be their sign of hope, that they might be freed. So it's a moment when you would have thought that this young woman would have been at the depths of despair. And yet she is thinking how to improve the world, not the Hitlers of the world, but the ordinary people, the daily interactions between people on the streetcar, just walking along the sidewalk. I don't know if it's because of Anne's circumstances, whatever, that caused her to do it, but she certainly, I think, speaks to us over the ages, and she had this sense of how people could get along, how there were possibilities on the small relationships in life, the one-on-one relationships where she felt a difference could be made, and that is, of course, I think, one of the great messages of the Holocaust Museum. I think there's another point here, and that is, even though I think she is a very valuable witness to history, Anne is dreaming about her future, and that is, of course, the hallmark of childhood, is that you have an imagination, you have a future. And in spite of what's happening to her, she's thinking about that future. And, of course, increasingly, it is a future as a writer. And yet her life is tragically cut short at the age of 15. And I think that here is her creativity, her legacy in just 2 years is really a very powerful indicator of all the lost potential of the murdered children in the Holocaust. I mean, over 1 million children were murdered solely because they were Jewish. She was just one of them, and look at what she alone has left us.
The world will still keep on turning without me. What is going to happen will happen. And anyway, it's no good trying to resist. I trust to luck, but should I be saved and spared from destruction, then it would be terrible if my diaries and my tales were lost.